I want, first of all, to reinforce that terrible, nasty feeling that there might be bad things out there if you engage online. It's a beautiful sunny day. You've got a lovely venue here and a really nice crowd. So I want to lower the mood. So I've written a poem. You'll notice I'm not using slides. I'm familiar with I moderate a lot of Carsten's work at the university. I'm familiar with his slides. I know there tends to be a lot of text, so I thought I'd go the other way and have none. Okay? So if it all goes horribly wrong, you can blame me. But again, it's one of those things where take risks and possibly, if you make mistakes, apologize for it afterwards and learn from it. So very much the message that Carsten was giving in his talk. So yes, I've written a poem. I call it a poem. I'm not sufficiently literally qualified to actually be able to make that assertion. It's a bunch of words which may have some flow and rhythm and occasionally rhyme, but they hopefully are on topic. What is your digital identity? Fractured shards of mirrors reflecting parts of you into places and times that you might not even have considered. Images and opinions, ideas including you or about you without you necessarily knowing, and others seeing those parts build their knowledge of you, build your identity in their view based on the elements that are visible to them, sometimes good, sometimes bad. If you're trying to make a difference, to teach, to reach, to change the ways of the world, there are people who will try to do you down, to bring you to their level or destroy your reputation. And they do not mind what tools they use in their quest for total domination. In an online, global, persistent world, we are and will increasingly be not only ourselves, the one our friends and family know, but also a product of the audience that we reached, the people who, if we tried our hardest, are the ones who most want to see us impeached. We can share many good things online, knowledge, excitement, and our purest passions, enthusing others and helping them to think, or sharing pictures of cats or puppies, flowers, knitting, our favourite food, though anything but the most trite and bland may bring others to a dark, bad mood. What can we do to manage this data, to resolve the fights and daily battles that can arise if we show our faces, engage in things we deem important, trying to change hearts and minds on topics from wars, equality, poverty, education, faith, and issues of all kinds? Step back and have no part in it? Living in the here and now, not reaching out, but in essence hiding from storms that can blow up and away in the social spaces that we find online and which, I fear, are our audience's dwelling places. If we do the best we can, the best we can get is to be ignored and our reach diminished. Less good is for others to take our place, spreading other messages, other meanings, and then the worst, oh my dear, scurrilous rumours and the spreading of fear. To change the world, we must engage, deliver our teaching both far and near, accept that sometimes we might get it wrong, and take critique from friends and foes. How can we find a set of rules to help in accepting, forgiving, and moving on? Christ knows. Now I feel a bit guilty about using that. But I mean it genuinely. The thing is, most of those rules that Christian teaching gives, and I've note here saying that other religious teachings also apply, but the Christian church teaches things like forgiveness. It teaches treating other people as you would be treated yourself. I don't need to tell you this, obviously. But they're the messages that I use in the classroom when I'm teaching this, and I've taught it to schools, and I've taught in universities and at educational conferences. And it's a message that is being picked up and used alongside the idea of e-safety, which is taught in our schools in the UK, which is very much in the traditional setting about don't let the children online, don't let them join communities of people because there's dangerous people out there. And yes, to be fair, there are some dangerous people out there. But we also need to be teaching people how to engage productively and usefully online. Because if they can't do that when they leave school, they're at a disadvantage. So I've mentioned the fact that there are some people out there who are probably a bit dangerous, unpleasant people. Carsten referred to them earlier, trolls. Okay? Now, the stereotypical thing about the computer troll is probably in his late 20s, early 30s, probably got long, greasy hair. Quick aside, I know quite a few people just recently, since Kirsten put up online the agenda for this conference, there have been quite a few people Googling me and finding me online. So a quick show of hands, because this always intrigues me. A quick show of hands, has anybody Googled me? 1, 2... So that's about a third of the people who've Googled me. So I've obviously put 2/3 of the people who are interested off. So sorry about that. But finding out about people online is quite an interesting thing. You might have found pictures of me as I looked a couple of years ago, where my hair was sort of down to my shoulder blades. My beard was here. There's cancer in the family, and I had it shaved off to show support for the young man who's unfortunately got a terminal illness. So my appearance has changed rather dramatically. So you can imagine me with long hair, not always as clean as it might have been. Sitting in my, frankly, dark office. I hardly ever have the lights on in my office because I have the glare from a screen, so why would I want to be able to see the visitors when they come in? I drink, normally, from a bottle of Diet Coke. That is fairly stereotypical of your computer geek, dark room, bottle of Diet Coke or Mountain Dew if you're American, probably. And you'll sit, and you're working away, and something annoys you. Now, you've got this nice computer. That's a window to the world. So you can talk about that, and you can slag someone off. And what tends to happen is that people get trapped into a cycle of doing that. So you've got the stereotypical one. He's sitting there. He's probably not had a girlfriend in 10 years, so all women are evil, obviously. And it's just rage pouring forth from the keyboard. And these days, they can actually find out things about, like, where you live or who your family are. And there's this phenomenon, ghastly phenomenon, called doxing, which is getting documents and releasing online, a way of bullying people into shutting up and no longer being able to say things that they could legitimately say, purely because they've said something that has offended that little troll sitting in his dark basement room. Generally, they're all American, obviously, and they live in the basement of their parents. Well, obviously, okay? Anyway, so that's enough about me. Thing is, I could easily have got that. And at one point, I suffered from a nervous breakdown. I was depressed. My only contact with the outside world was through, we didn't have social media in those days, so it was Usenet groups. And probably to a certain extent, I might have behaved along those lines. It was never with malicious intent. And in my defense, I would say, at the time, I was mentally ill. That is something to consider, that there are people, plenty of people in the world, roughly 20% of the population in the developed world will be suffering from some form of mental illness at any point. Now, as Celeste pointed out, that doesn't mean you go around making a diagnosis, but be aware that people may be actually not that well, and they may be responding not because they're naturally nasty, evil, unpleasant people, because most people, I don't know whether you've met them, but most people are actually quite nice. I keep telling my students I'm evil. They don't believe me. Apparently the evidence doesn't stack up against my assertions, but until some of them get marks. But there's all these things that can happen. And in that poem, I alluded to the fact the idea that your digital identity is not just about what you put out there. That nice, carefully managed image that you create, that you think, I know, this is going to present a really good image of me, in my case, probably in the university, or my work on digital identity, in your case, probably the church, or anything else that you might have a deep interest in that you want to share with other people. But somebody out there is going to be offended by that and is going to decide that they want to tear it down. Somebody, somewhere, is bound to. Somebody else is going to think that you're the best thing since sliced bread. That's okay. The world is huge. We have lots of different people in it, obviously. And the thing about things like social media and any sort of online stuff is that it can reach any one of them. Traditionally, if you're presenting things, you get told a few things that you should definitely know, and I should know how many there are. There's probably 3. Know your content, know your audience, and know your venue. Now, this morning, I didn't know my venue, but at least we were here a little bit early, so I had a rough idea of what was going on. I knew roughly who my audience were, and hopefully there is at least some evidence that I know my content. We're not being live streamed this year. If we were being live streamed, I would not know who my audience was. There is, obviously, a chunk where I could be sure, probably 95% of people who would be watching because they're from the same sort of background as you. But there would be some who weren't. The very first MOOC, one of these massively online open courses, or massively open online courses, I can never work out which way around the O's should go, was run by some Canadians. And there was one person in particular on that MOOC who was adamant and that the whole thing was a waste of time and nonsense, and that this was basically a form of white male imperialism trying to take over the education world. She wasn't even from the education world, to be fair, but she'd run into some really nasty characters who were always putting her down on a service called Second Life. And that had clearly affected her response to this sort of thing. And I have to say, having mentioned this white male imperialism, I do have to apologise for the circumstances of my birth. I am white, my parents were relatively middle class, and I am male. In a way, it's a shame that we do have to apologise for that sort of thing, but on the other hand, it does make a difference. And I know this is something which is dear to quite a lot of my friends' hearts, but having a really good diverse mix in any organisation, anything like a conference, and it's nice to see that here, means that you get a more balanced view of things. And that's the good thing about having a huge global audience. Although you do get the occasional one who is possibly a little eccentric, let us say, in their responses, it does mean that you can have a great deal of people all giving input into what you're doing and giving critiques on it. And if you make a mistake, that means that people are there to give feedback. But what do we do about those one or two? Because those one or two, the thing about the internet is they'll find friends too. So have you heard of a service called 4chan? Nasty place, don't visit it unless you've got a really good reason to have to go there. But people there have a rather strange sense of humour, I think it's fair to say. I'm sure there are perfectly normal people there as well. But they will tend to pick up on simple things and distort them for what they think is the sake of having a laugh. So primary school teachers recently, quite relatively recent, last couple of years, have taken to trying to demonstrate to their school children how messages can spread a long way across the world and through the internet by having a picture of themselves and holding up a sign saying, I'm doing this for my year threes. I want them to see how far the message spreads. Please share and retweet. That occasionally goes wrong. And some of them get picked up by people with less than nice intentions, and they will take that image and they will put eye patches on them, or they'll put devil's horns on them, or all sorts of things like that, and put witty captions, memes, or memes in the making, as they try to make them. And those gather pace, and once one person's done it, other people do it. And of course, that message still spreads a lot, but it probably doesn't have quite the same meaning that it was intended to. But it's possibly a better lesson to the children than the original intention. Because actually, the methodology is undermined there, if you don't mind me just getting into academic terms. They're saying, look, this thing that you share could be shared all over the place. Well, of course it's going to be if you ask people to. That's... If you've got friends, it will snowball. That's the point. But what do you do about the fact that you've got these people who will create unpleasant content from the things that you do with the best intentions? Law, obviously, varies across the planet depending on which country you're in. I'm not a lawyer, but I do teach a module which is rather joyously called SLEAS. It's the social, legal, and ethical aspects of science and engineering, is its current term. But because it's got the social, legal, and ethical aspects, the name SLEAS works quite nicely because I don't know whether you've ever heard the concept. I mean, there are two concepts here. One's the internet is made of cats, and the other, there's a very quite popular, catchy song, which is unfortunately the internet was made for porn. And that is a view that a lot of teenagers seem to have. And when they come to us at university, they tend to be teenagers. So it's a nicely named, from that point of view, module. But we cover lots of things about legalities, about all sorts of ethical concerns. And one of the reasons I don't want to use slides when I do this sort of talk, is that if I have slides, it's very easy then to include an example of where one of these things has gone wrong. That, in a way, is just adding to that catalogue of sins that is making up this poor person's digital identity by spreading it to a wider audience. And it's almost impossible to avoid putting that into your slideshow. Making an entire separate one up would be troublesome and hard work. I must actually just commission people to do it about me, because then it's fine, and I could do a set of slides on it. We obviously have laws in most countries against defamation. So if somebody is being really deeply unpleasant, you can take them to court to have that stopped. But that costs money. We have copyright laws, but if you're sharing something on the internet in order to get it spread widely, you probably don't want to start trying to threaten people with copyright suits to try and stop that from being spread. And that's true for any material. Whatever material you create, if you want people to see it, one of the best ways is Creative Commons, because, apart from anything else, it gets rid of the problem of trying to defend the property rights in it. I mean, there are instances where you still might want to, when actually somebody's trying to lay claim to it themselves. But by and large, you're just saying, no, go ahead, use it. This is a free license. Get on with it. We like that. The best thing to do when that sort of thing arises... Oh, there's one other key case where it's important to do something. If there are actual threats, and I don't know whether any of you have seen, but there's a really strong misogynistic theme to a lot of trolling at the moment, with very unpleasant threats being made against women just because they're women who had the audacity to speak out. And that needs to be stamped on. And the best thing to do there, if you ever see it, report it to your local police. Whatever country you're in, give it a go. Some countries will respond better than others. And if it's an American or UK or European person, try and report it to the police in that country, because those people are being deeply unpleasant. And I mean, that's things like death threats, bomb threats, rape threats. Okay, so those can happen. They don't happen to the majority of people most of the time, but at the moment are increasingly common, sadly. No, but the best thing to do with most run-of-the-mill people doing you down, trying to undermine what you're saying, getting into an argument with you because they're an atheist and therefore you're clearly wrong because there's no proof that there's a God, whilst, as I don't profess to hold a religious faith, particularly not in terms of Christianity, my response is to say, well, actually, I hate to point it out, but you're wrong about what proof is in terms of science. So if you could just go back and adjust your thinking there. That's probably not best to do if you are professing faith, because that just gets them even more annoyed. So as Carsten said, one of the things you do, you explain nicely that it's a shame that you've not been able to agree, thank them for their input, and basically step back and ignore it. Now, quite often that will continue on. They'll have a few more goes trying to rile you into saying something. And of course, the internet, global, persistent. It's very hard to get rid of information that you want to get rid of. In the EU, we've got the right to be forgotten, but that just means that, for instance, Google or other search engines have to remove you from their search index, a particular entry from the search index. Google's current policy is that they will still list you on their indexes in America and other countries. So you only disappear from view in Europe. And that means the conversation that can then carry on, if it was a blog post or something, on that blog post, it's just you'll never know about it because it's now been hidden from you. So that's rather counterproductive because it's better to know. And one of the key ways of knowing is to regularly Google yourself. I'm told this is something you shouldn't do in public. But if you Google yourself, you will normally find a lot of, well, depends. If you're active online, you'll find a lot of results. You quite often find things that you never even knew about, that other people have just mentioned you in passing. I think my favourite example of that was that some students at Reading University at one point had included me in a role-playing game as this rather strange, transgendered, cross-dressing demigod. These weren't even students that I actually taught. They were friends of students that I taught. Anyway, so that was quite fun finding that. I mean, I didn't mind it. I can't find it anymore, sadly. It seems to have disappeared off Google's lists. But because I was working in this field particularly, I found it very useful not only to go and Google myself on a fairly regular basis, but to use things like Google Alerts. I don't know if you've come across those. They're not actually as good as they used to be, and there are some alternative methods. But they will keep an eye on the things on the web. And if your name pops up, or your interest, or whatever, they can send you an email about it that lets you know that this thing's appeared, and you can go and look at it. Alternatives to that now are a thing called Talkwalker and Social Mention. And if you're into trying a little bit of very simple programming type stuff, linking some services together, there's a thing called If This Then That, ifttt.com, which allows you, for instance, to say that if this turns up in a Google search, or if it's on Facebook, or if it's on Twitter, if my name's mentioned, for instance, then send me an email, or post something to a blog, which might get a bit circular, or to text you on your phone if you're in a country where they support that. And that means that you can keep a handle on what's actually going on. If something starts to get out of hand, you can approach professionals to help. By and large, there is no need to. But obviously, as Celeste was saying, your communications people are a good plan if it's something that's church-related particularly. But you can also use external commercial ones. But most of them, what they do is they say, right, okay, what are the really good things about you? So, I don't know, cats. I like cats, I like food. All of the things that are nice and bland and that nobody's really going to be too upset about. And then they get lots of people to post about that sort of nice, positive thing or bland thing. And just ignore the nasty stuff. And it's amazing how quickly the bad stuff drops out of the listing ranks. And people, if they can't find it on Google, it probably never happened, increasingly. So that is probably one of your best ways of managing any unpleasant incidents. Similarly, of course, that exact same policy of getting other people to be talking about why what you do is good, why it's interesting, why it's fun, whatever, is the best way of getting other people to notice the good stuff anyway. So actually, it doesn't really require any change in behavior. It just means working with your friends to promote what is good. And that, surely, is the meaning of social anyway.